So, a while ago I was suggested a game by a longtime fan, which is great! I mean, every hobby-based community thrives on people suggesting other people things they like. But imagine my reaction once I recognized the mentioned game, Darkstone. Honestly, I never played it, nor did I even know that there was a PlayStation port of a game that I've once read about in an old PC gaming magazine. The only thing I knew about it was that it was an action dungeon crawler with loot in the style of that other game, but in 3D and with hunger mechanics. And now, apparently, it had a really impressive port released years later after the PC version, also like the other game. Come to think of it, the different PC ports adapted, better or worse, started to get quite common during the era of the first PlayStation, and now pretty much every big game gets released on the living room PCs too, with various results. But before I'm going to illustrate the whole package that is Darkstone, please stay a while and listen to what I have to say about that other game that came before it. I'm not using its true name, because I vowed to own a physical copy of every game I directly mention in any of my videos. You know, as a sign of respect. It's in bad taste to talk about someone who isn't present, right? And that game is notoriously expensive, so... yeah, I caved and bought it. And I don't regret it one bit, as Diablo for PS1 is amazing. And really, controversial opinion, I actually prefer playing hack and slashes of this kind on consoles. Sure, you lose the precision and you don't have access to hotbars or customizable shortcuts, but I guess I'm a type who prefers the feel of the game instead of convenience. If I wanted to click things multiple times, I would go back to my addiction. Anyway, even the newer ones are pretty good. Diablo 3 was an extremely enjoyable romp, especially with friends around. Hell, I nearly caved in and bought Diablo 4 because I had so much fun playing Darkstone and Diablo 1. But then I thought, Sacred 2 is probably better anyway. It was a Friday, spring of 2003. My parents were at work till the late evening hours, so after school I had to go to my grandma's place, as I didn't have keys to my home back then. Grandma was running some errands, but my uncle, who was living with her, let me in. He was a bit of an intimidating individual back then, with his head shaven clean, devil-may-care attitude, and listening to the heaviest kind of metal. But still, he invited me to his room and let me watch him playing Diablo on PS1, trying to explain the game to me and even letting me play for a bit. It was and wasn't the first time I played it. And by that I mean that when my cousin borrowed me a metric shit ton of PC demo discs, I installed Diablo 1 somewhere around 2001 and chickened out before going to the dungeon itself. Yeah, it might sound ridiculous to be terrified by a game that looks like this. By the way, I love the look of Diablo 1's visuals in all of its low-resolution glory. It's truly iconic and timeless, but the incredibly heavy atmosphere, overall darkness, and the knowledge that deep under that cathedral something truly evil lurks was enough for my young mind. Watching someone else play reduced the scariness factor to a minimum, especially seeing how my uncle turned the game into Doom on easy, melting demons in seconds. And it was on Inferno, the highest difficulty level that the game had to offer. My uncle didn't understand English, nor did he have access to the internet. He just mastered the game himself, a game that was at first glance something completely out of his comfort zone, being much more complex than racing or beat-em-ups. He just got completely ensnared by its mechanics and world. A few months later, after he finally got bored with Diablo 1, he sold off his PlayStation to buy a PC and spent every minute of his free time playing the sequel. And I'm pretty sure he wasn't an isolated case. Diablo's release in 1996 pretty much created an entire subgenre of action RPGs that, to this day, are often called Diablo clones. Sure, there were other games about dungeoning before Diablo, like Rogue, NetHack, or the first Mystery Dungeon series, but Diablo streamlined the process and made it extra enjoyable to the masses thanks to fantastic audio visuals, active combat, and an addicting loot lottery. You might wonder why I'm talking so much about the original Diablo when the title and thumbnail directly mention Darkstone, and if that's the case, then I would want to say... Hello, you must be new here and don't know about my tendency to go off on a tangent. Seriously though, the French-based Delphine Software International was clearly inspired by Blizzard's creation when they were cooking Darkstone, and they didn't even try to deny it. And while I much prefer to judge each game as if it was made in a vacuum, where other games don't exist, I think that omitting Diablo's existence would be disrespectful to both studios. Released 2.5 years after its inspiration, Darkstone, to a more cynical mind, could be described as a high fantasy 3D ripoff of Diablo, and again, it's an apt description, and most of the game's ideas are nearly copied from the other game. Even some that I thought to be original turned out not to be after I replayed Diablo. But saying that it's just a cash grab and trying to ride on the popularity of a bigger game would be extremely reductive in my opinion, as... spoiler, I actually liked it better than the thing it apes. When it comes to PC gaming, Darkstone sold moderately well and became sort of a cult classic. It did well enough for Delphine to try earning additional cash by making a PlayStation port, and they did an extremely competent job. Sure, overworlds had to be segmented and made smaller, you can only use one character instead of having two active ones, and multiplayer was completely wiped. But other than that, it's bloody good. If the PS1 version was released shortly after the PC original in 1999, I think it would be a smashing success. But it wasn't, hitting the store shelves in the first quarter of 2001, 3 years after Diablo's port and very late in PlayStation's lifespan. It lost a lot of its freshness, but still was very playable and looked presentable. Hell, when you look at the later titles of this kind on PC, like Dungeon Siege, the graphics weren't all that better than the first 3D Diablo clone. Our excuse for going on an adventure is as follows. 1,000 years ago, there was this big conflict between life and death. Death's bony ass was whooped, and then everyone clapped. But now, one of the druids betrayed the forces of good in pursuit of the ultimate power. With Death's help, he becomes a dragon lord and destroys his former comrades. The player character, as a conveniently orphaned during childhood representative of one out of 4 very different classes, coming up in 2 different sexes, has to stop him and save the lands of Uma. Funnily enough, the backstory found in the manual of the PC version is much more detailed, with PS1's feeling like a summary of it. The story plays a distant second role to gameplay and pretty much everything else. But it's there. There are quite a few characters you'll meet, but don't expect more than 2 boxes worth of text, and actually that was quite refreshing after having to sit through minutes of poorly written drivel. Anyway, as I've mentioned before, there are 4 classes: warriors, mages, rogues and priests, each with different starting stats, abilities available to them, stat growths and stat caps. So even though you can assign stat points in whatever way you want when your character levels up, you'll never be as proficient in doing something as the character that was purely designed for that role, which is something I really approve of. Don't get me wrong, there are incentives to make you want to level up stats that aren't your main one, with dexterity being the most important if you want to hit anything and have a decent armor class, strength being required to use any shield at all, and also making you hit things just a bit harder, life making you not die in one hit, and magic allowing you to learn spells and having bigger mana pools. To be honest, I think that mages can get away with putting every stat point into magic because, yeah, magic in this game is that good. But more of that later. Creating a vitality-based hero, something that Diablo didn't do, is as intriguing as it is puzzling. I mean, yeah, you'll have a truckload of HP and a priest's gear is as tanky as the equipment of any other class, but you'll be just a really inefficient warrior who is worse at magic than mages and can't hit anything in melee because of Dex being his dump stat. Then again, every health potion in this game heals your whole HP, so maybe the survivability is worth it? I, being the munchkin I am, chose the assassin to reap many benefits of improved dexterity stat and wanting to have fun keeping my enemies at range. It was a decision that I was very grateful for, being hours deep into the game. Finally, we arrive at the only town in the game. There's no introductory NPC or anything, you just spawn at the center of the map, with a handful of gold and trash gear left to your own devices. Initially I felt quite lost, trying to find an NPC who would give me a quest or guide me in any way, but Darkstone doesn't do anything like that, trusting that you'll find your way. While being lost, the town's theme hit me like a truck, awakening a feeling of nostalgia for a game I played for the first time. There's also a minor secret. If you tip one piece of gold to the musical duo, you'll be able to hear the lyrical version of the theme. My biggest gripe about the music is that going into the menu or inventory stops it completely and forces the track to play from start once unpaused. You can spend your initial gold on potions or a minor equipment upgrade, or invest in yourself by leveling up one of the 7 skills available to your character class. Skills range from universally great, like being able to identify items without an NPC, or being able to buff your offense or defense. Both buffs are available to priests, so maybe they are actually secretly OP. To situational, like sneaking or trap defusal. They are worth your time and money, though, making every class have a unique playstyle. Ready or not? One has to finally step out of the safe haven of the town walls into the wilds. There are 8 lands containing enemies and 1 dungeon each. You linearly progress through them, starting with Ardil and ending with Serkesh. But there's nothing stopping you from visiting the final dungeon at the start of the game if you feel like it. You'll get erased by the enemies and the final boss will have a really nasty surprise waiting for you, but you can do it. You can, in theory, get some powerful equipment and loads of experience early, but it's not really worth the pain and you'll have to do earlier dungeons anyway. Why? Because every land outside of Serkesh hides a crystal of certain virtue, and you'll need all 7 of them to get the means to stop Drak once and for all. But let's leave that for now. Before even finding an entrance to the dungeon, you'll be assaulted by a batch of starter enemies that aren't much of a threat, allowing to learn the controls in a fairly safe manner. The combat is really simple, especially if you go full melee. The game will auto-target for you, but the range it recognizes is quite small, so you have to always keep that in mind. And while it may seem tempting to just stay in place when enemies are so weak and able to only attack you at the close range, it's nice to cultivate good habits of juking and dodging from early on. Seriously. After killing the first 10 or so enemies, you should level up. Level ups come extremely quickly in this game, more so than in the PC version where you could have 2 characters and the XP got divided between them. With each level up you get 6 attribute points to distribute them however you like. Personally, I suggest you invest them in your main stat till you reach about 50, and then invest some points into magic because it's really useful. Saving up some points along the way for the time when you find a good piece of equipment requiring stat you never invest into. Loot is going to be pretty trash for a while though. Your inventory space is limited and potions do take space. Luckily, gold does not. Most gear, especially ones with low durability and without additional properties, won't bring you much profit, so it's your choice if you want to bring them with you or just leave them to rot. Dungeons are randomly generated by the game each time the run is started. Floors aren't too big, but don't worry, you'll get lost in them anyway, especially with how dark they usually are. The light or night vision spell can be really handy in this game. Speaking of handy, while there's no minimap, Outside of using a skill available to warriors, you can warp to the points of interest, like entrances, exits or special rooms if you walked near them. And trust me, not noticing them can and will happen. The problem is that to use that feature you have to get rid of the monsters around first, and monsters spontaneously spawn into existence quite often, especially for the first few minutes of visiting a floor. The game isn't even ashamed of that and poofs them from nothing just near you. And while it feels like a source of free experience now, it won't be like that for too long. Dungeons are also full of chests and objects to break. You can also find fountains restoring your mana or health, which will help you conserve your stash of potions. If you run out of them, you can rest for a bit if there are no monsters around, but it's better to just go back to the town to resupply, especially if you have the magic door spell. Potions are extremely cheap. Other reasons to stop dungeoning are your equipment needing repair from constant abuse, and yes, if you neglect it enough, it will irreversibly break. Being unable to pick up more loot or starving. Because yeah, hunger is a thing in this game. It's not a big deal though. You get hungry really slowly and there's plenty of food everywhere, so you don't even need to have rations with you. And if you learn food spell, you can just negate hunger completely. Cool idea, but it has such a negligible effect on you that you just forget about its existence. You might also find book stands containing spell tomes, and if your luck is right, you'll get something really nice during your first dungeon run. I got Magic Door and, more importantly, Berserker.
Whoa!
Oh boy, for such a low-level spell, you'll be able to learn the first level of it no matter which class you've picked. It's so incredibly useful that it just blows my mind. You get a giant armor class bonus, helping you negate hits, increased accuracy, and life regen to save your potion resources, not to mention long duration at a pretty minuscule cost. You'll need it sooner or later, trust me. You can also find scrolls that, just like in Diablo, are a one-time sample of a spell. Spell tomes, especially if you're playing the less magic-inclined classes, are great sellers too. Speaking of loot, one thing that really irks me is the fact that loot can disappear when more of it drops from another enemy. It's especially prevalent when it comes to gold, so once some of it drops, you'll have to rush to a pile, grab it, and then fight the rest of the enemies. Later in the game, gold is everything, so it's extra frustrating when you lose a nice pile of it just because of the developers being afraid of frying your PlayStation. There can be a fair amount of monsters on the screen, and they are fairly well modeled and animated. There's quite a big variety of them too. Some of the later ones will cause you to feel things you wouldn't think that a game like Darkstone would bring to you. Dungeoning is fine and all. Killing monsters and getting loot is really fun in this game. But somewhere around the 4th and final level of the first dungeon, or earlier if you actually explored the area around the dungeon, you'll realize that there's more than meets the eye. Darkstone has quests. Actually, each of the lands, bar the last one, has a pool of 3. but only one is available each playthrough, and that's how the game decides which elements of dungeons and NPCs show up during your journey. Your individual set of quests is chosen at the start of the playthrough. Actually, like with the stat caps, I thought that it was something exclusive to Darkstone, but no, Diablo had that too. I was just very unlucky and always got the same sets of side quests. They are mostly quite silly adventures that a friendly game master would put into your tabletop role-playing sessions when there aren't enough people to move in with the main campaign. But, you know, that was the thing that made them really charming. And some of them are quite complex, forcing you to sometimes do things in the overworld or venture between the floors. You actually have to gather clues, be it from NPCs or from various scrolls, and use your inventory like in a point-and-click adventure game. Having a correct item with you isn't enough, so it is quite likely that if you don't know what the quest is about, you'll reach the final floor and be completely lost without the crystal you came for. Like I was when I met this dude who was looking for the Fountain of Youth because in the mirror he had with him, he saw himself as old and ugly. I was like, okay. Then backtracked to the previous floors looking for stuff that I could have missed, just to realize that I had a mirror in my inventory, so I went back to the guy, gave him the mirror, so he realized that he isn't ugly, just average at worst, and received a mirror of lies, which, without the context that I've utterly missed by not exploring the overworld, seemed pointless. So then I decided to leave the dungeon. The ability to fast travel between points of interest is extra helpful in moments like this, as while monsters respawn when you change floors, you should be able to warp between entrances if you're quick enough. On the surface, I've discovered the rest of the quest. There was a village where every woman was turned into stone because an old hag was jealous of their beauty. Presented with the mirror of deception, she became so happy with her delusions that she dispelled the curse, saving villagers from the eternal sausage fest, and thus getting us our first crystal. During another playthrough, instead of gaslighting the witch into thinking that she is the next top model, you could investigate and become a part of a cult. Or in another life, beat up 2 elemental golems and retrieve the Horn of Plenty to solve the world hunger. The horn is an actual in-game object that, if used in the menu, will spawn you a chicken drumstick each time it is used, further avoiding the fear of hunger. Because yeah, thanks to the game's open structure, you don't need to finish this quest the moment you can do it. Though it actually bit me in the ass, because during that playthrough I also got a quest where you need to have a crystal that you get from turning in the Horn of Abundance. Anyway, quests are nice. Sure, it will take you at most 40 minutes, and that's including killing monsters and going back to town to sell your trash. Some quests are simple, some more complicated. Let's take a look at the second quest that I've encountered. There's a fairy that will tell you about a snake charming song, and that you have to find 5 reeds of different lengths and place them in the right order to safely take the next crystal. Or you can be just like me, completely disregard that option and simply kill every snake that is guarding the treasure. In fact, the hard way is more lucrative, as you'll get experience, possible drops, and be able to resell the reeds for a pretty penny. Perry the Publican will buy quest items from you if they no longer have use. It's a feature exclusive to PS1 version. Other quests involve destroying ancient statues, aborting the unborn Uber Lizardmensch, rescuing a princess from being mind-controlled, saving a unicorn, infiltrating the underground poison lab to save some guy's wife, or defeating a demon by solving his puzzle. And that's not even everything there is. Sure, they can be confusing and even frustrating at points, but when it clicks, you can really appreciate the little scenarios that the developers prepared for you. And the more annoying and complex quests also tend to come with extra steps that reap bonus rewards, like getting a key to open a chamber where you can choose one of the 3 magic weapons. Choose sword, as they sell for the most money. I wouldn't be myself if I skipped over my favorite quest.
The Fountains of Immortality.
It's not the most interesting gameplay-wise. You just search for 3 fountains to get potions of immortality to save the husband of some woman. But then, when you meet the guy who sent you on the search, and who reveals that the whole scavenger hunt was pointless from the start, and he told you to do that just to earn your trust and lower your guard. And then he simply attacks you. I laughed at the subversion of quite right uninteresting formula. As every boss, he is just like a standard enemy, just with a really big amount of HP. That's kind of underwhelming about the game, but oh well. Oh, and this journey also gets the player 3 elixirs of youth. Because yes, there's aging in this game. What? I forgot to mention that? Because again, it's a really underbaked mechanic. Spending time in the game's world, no matter where, as long as it isn't in the inventory or menus, your character slowly ages. I think it's 1 year per hour of gameplay, but I'm not sure. Anyway, with age, just like in real life, a character learns slower, thus earning less experience. And after a certain threshold, their stats start to drop until de-aged. During a standard run, you'll get 1 complimentary elixir near the end of the game. Some quests reward you with them, and there's a small chance of them being dropped randomly from powerful enemies or on the higher difficulties. Later you can even buy them, though they are quite expensive. But then again, with how fast the game is, aging is not a problem. Though there are traps and cursed items that can age you significantly, so beware. After the first 2 lands, one can become complacent and full of themselves. Especially if you find some good gear or magic, you'll just rush into the rooms, stand in place and attack coming monsters, face check everything and overall be acting like a jackass. And that will only bring you to your demise. From the 3rd land, ranged enemies become much more prevalent, and while they aren't one-shotting you or anything, they hurt. And there is a possibility of being easily overwhelmed, as the game will throw a lot of them at you. The 3rd dungeon was the place where I died for the first time. Dying is, contrary to every new game of this genre, painful and full of consequences. You can either accept your fate and be booted to the main menu to load the game, or be respawned in the town naked and have to run to the place of your death to retrieve your gear. If it is even still there. I never tried to do that. It always seemed like too much of a hassle, and I mean, if I was skilled with my good gear, I don't even want to think about what will happen when I get there naked. This system makes a bit more sense on PC, where you have two characters and the other can either revive the fallen one or take their gear and return it to the rightful owner later. Luckily, I always saved when entering a new dungeon, so I lost about 10 minutes of progress. You can save at any moment of the game. Sure, it takes a bit of time, but it's like an insurance. You invest a bit of time to potentially save a lot more of it in the case of failure. Fair, extremely fair. If you get too greedy, it's
your fault.
And it took me many saveless deaths to learn that maybe I should actually save more often. By the way, Darkstone takes 6 out of 15 blocks of memory card, so it's a bit of a hog. Still, not as much as Diablo's
10.
Come to think of it, the first 2 lands are like a really long tutorial of the game. After that, the game slowly teaches the player that it's only going to be harder from now on, throwing more and more obstacles and rising up the difficulty. Swarms of poisonous enemies were the first warning. And while poison in this game isn't all that dangerous, it lingers until you either drink an antidote potion or cure yourself with a spell. For more than half of the game, I over-relied on the Berserker spell and chugging health potions if the situation was especially dire, occasionally running away and dodging attacks. I neglected my detection skill, and even when my character had the diffuse skill, I didn't bother to use it and just opened everything willy-nilly, being careless, which ended poorly many times.
No, no, no. Don't do it. No, no. Don't do it. Just don't. For the love of God.
While you're constantly getting stronger, getting level ups, finding new gear and upgrading it in town, the enemies get buffed at a much higher rate. By the way, when it comes to upgrading, I wanted to mention that it is quite an amazing, simple system. You can pay a quite hefty price in gold to raise attack for weapons or armor class for armor, though it also lowers the maximum durability of that item. Later equipment has lots of durability, so it isn't much of a problem, and it helps to compensate for bad luck in the loot lottery. Hope you enjoyed your moments of feeling OP, because from now on, the game will demand every bit of your focus and attention.
Please, stop.
Even though I collected a lot of magic tomes and actually leveled up my magic, I haven't really used it. And as I've mentioned before, magic in this game feels like cheating at times. You can manipulate things from a distance with a telekinesis spell, push others away, or use an ultimate solution to my problems with ranged enemies, the reflection spell, which protects your character from every ranged attack. It is really pricey when it comes to mana pool and lasts only for a few seconds, so I couldn't really abuse it. But it was an option. I wasn't even using a skill I leveled up using my hard-earned money, instead just face-checking chests and breakable objects as I've mentioned before. A realization came to me. You see, my dad likes games like new RPG-light Assassin's Creeds. He isn't really good at them, but he enjoys playing them when he has time to do so. And sometimes when I visit, I'm able to catch him playing, and it always frustrated me to see him just wail on the enemy without using skills or even auto-targeting. Hell, he played through the Odyssey for about
30 hours.
before he realized that there were any skills at all, including healing during combat. And I was the same now, just going with the route of the least effort. I wasn't respecting the game, and thus it didn't respect me. After all, it's a two-way street. Developers gave players all these fancy tools, and I wanted to succeed in trying to break the walls they were building by smashing them with my head. I mean, yeah, it's an option, but it wasn't too efficient, and that's the funny paradox about rushing things and being lazy, isn't it? You lose your patience, and by trying to save a few seconds, you lose whole minutes. Minutes that you'll never get back. Reflecting on that for a while, I promised myself that I would change my ways to mend my relationship with the game. I started playing smarter. I still made mistakes, sure, but I felt much better about myself. Deaths were less common. I was in it again.
It was at this moment Hodyna knew. He fucked up.
Now this is life. Yeah, baby. Go on. Oh yeah. Do it for Hodyna. Oh. Wait. To be honest, I laughed hard when I died there. And my save was 15 minutes ago. Hell, I laughed when I got there again, didn't save, and tried to bravely go through that corridor just to die again. It's such a bullshit trap that will kill you at least a few times. Well, unless you use the reflection spell. But yeah, I enjoyed trolling from the creators, even if it goes a bit out of hand sometimes. Hell, there's even a ring you get as a reward that decreases your stats, and you can buy one in the shop too. Or when you leave a dungeon just for the enemies who respawn near its entrance to kill you without you having a chance to react. And that's saying nothing about when the game introduces mages as the enemies. They have a powerful ranged attack and can teleport around like there's no tomorrow. Having more than 2 of them in the same room and you're dead meat. And the final dungeon is full of them. At the end of my first playthrough, every enemy two-shotted me. Sure, I had quite a good dodge chance, but if anything managed to hit me, I was toast. The fact that I had barely more HP than when I started the game could have something to do with that, but Assassin has crap life growth rates anyway. With all 7 crystals, Sebastian, the druid who survived Drak's appearance, is able to remake the time orb for us. Without it, Drak will just restore his health to full when he is at the half of his life bar. Drak's lair is tough thanks to the presence of many frustrating enemy types and the abundance of traps, but the treasures it holds are as grand as the dangers that preceded them. Outside of the legendary Mjolnir's hammer, one can find an elixir of youth and a few stat potions. These things raise one stat permanently by 1, which isn't much, but they ignore the pesky stat caps and there's an unlimited amount of them. At that stage of the game, you can just buy them for 10,000 gold pieces, less if you have bargaining skills leveled up. So yeah, each level up is worth 60,000 gold, a sum that is quite paltry, especially at the higher difficulties. Grinding gold and buying stat potions is the main way of getting stronger at this point of the game, and it will stay like that. After level 30, the amounts of XP required to level up gets more and more insane, which can be a shock after drowning in level ups through the first few hours of the game. Still, I love that gold is so useful in this game. Skills, repair fees, spell tomes, stat potions, upgrades, gold never loses its value, which makes the dopamine jumps only higher as the amounts dropped by the enemies grow. Seeing your stats get higher and higher is addicting, even if there are some empty levels. And it's really nice to see your little scrub become this all-powerful, doped-on potions demigod in just a playthrough or two. Though, thanks to the different difficulty levels, you'll still get your ass whooped by the enemies. Difficulties are tied to the character's level. If it reaches a certain threshold, a new one unlocks, up to the 5th one, Legend, requiring the staggering level 60. Seriously, with how fast you level up in the beginning, you might think that it won't be an issue. Hell, you'll probably unlock Adept for reaching level 20 around the 4th area of the first playthrough. By the way, don't change the difficulty, you won't be ready for it, trust me. The gap between each difficulty is immense, and they actually expect you to go there with your character properly prepared after finishing the game on the lower one, with Drak's lair as the ultimate stat check. Speaking of finishing the game, we finally meet Drak. He changes into a dragon, and if you're playing a squishier class, he'll burn you to a crisp with a single fireball. Hope you saved. You also can't really juke him that much because he summons 2 wyverns, and if you kill one of them, he'll just resummon another one. Well, this problem has a simple solution.
Just
Just lead these creatures out of the fighting zone and get back to the proper arena. If you did everything correctly, they should leave you be and allow you to solo Drak, which isn't going to be easy. It's just about getting into the rhythm of attacking and dodging from a distance, of course. Tankier characters probably could bum rush him and spam potions, but that wasn't an option for me. Oh, and remember about that fancy orb you got from Sebastian. If not, then prepare for Drak restoring his HP to full once you take 50% of it. And he'll do that over and over again until you finally use it properly. But wait! Time Orb works only for about 60 seconds, so you're on a timer, making it pretty much a damage check. And dodging takes away a lot of time you could spend attacking. I thought I couldn't really do it at this point, but there's always a dirty way. did you know that ranged attacks actually have practically infinite range? And that if you're far enough, enemies won't actually attack you even if they are receiving damage? Yeah, add one to the other and... success. Drax dead, baby. Drax dead. He drops a key to his stash, where you'll find enough gold for about 15 attribute potions, a MacGuffin to finish the game, and a dragon scale, which will either be sold after finishing the game or used to get secret attribute potions. So, triumphantly, we go back to the town. Nobody will really want to talk with us, so we have to just place the artifact we got from Drak on the titular Darkstone. Yeah, that weird obelisk that appears after gathering 4 crystals is the thing that the game was named after. Beware, everything that is not equipped on you will be sold and thus lost when the game ends, so make sure you're satisfied with it. You can quickly get to the vendors and buy things as long as the Chicken of Doom doesn't get you. If he does, he'll congratulate you and the credits will roll. And that's pretty much how a typical playthrough of Darkstone looks. Now you can do that again on other difficulties or try another character class. Maybe experience every quest there is. I didn't bother getting to the legend difficulty, ending at the beginning of the master tier. On higher difficulty, enemies hit well harder, have more health and get additional resistances. They scale hard, much faster than you, even with all the better gear, with actually useful bonuses or the higher amounts of gold. There are also more traps and higher chances of finding cursed items. You know, one of the biggest problems of this game is that the gear isn't all that interesting actually. There's such a small pool of truly unique and legendary items, and while it feels good to find ones with bonuses that are actually useful to you, they still feel so boring. Even when compared to the first Diablo. I've said that it's really a good port of the PC original, and I'll defend this opinion completely. Actually, trying the original I was quite bothered by its cluttered UI and toolbars that weren't really all that helpful. Sure, in the PS1 version you can only bind 2 items and 2 spells to the shoulder buttons, but it's just so elegant in a way, even if having to change out one spell or ability for a magic door every 20 or so minutes is really annoying. And come on now, using an analog stick to walk around and mashing buttons is so much more engaging than just clicking around. Also, it could be a skill issue on my part, but I tended to miss a lot more using a mouse. I also felt like there were fewer enemies around in the PC version. They respawned a lot less too, making the port actually more like an action game. The original is much smoother when it comes to the frame rates though. Seriously, even the NTSC version feels sluggish compared to it. Oh, and there are more NPCs providing additional context to your journeys, and they are actually voiced. You also can get minor side quests from them to earn additional rewards. When playing solo with 2 characters, the other will be controlled by the CPU and it plays okay, but I suggest giving it a rogue or a warrior for the best experience. You can switch freely between characters, and as I've said before, if one falls in the battle, you can use the other one to revive them, and you better switch between them often, or the CPU controlled one will end up horribly underpowered. For me it was more hassle than it was worth, but it's optional, you can just roll with a single character anyway. Another thing that was replaced was inventory management. Sadly, on the PS1 it's way more generic than the beloved grid-based polyomino system. They probably felt that it would be annoying to do with a controller, but then we had Resident Evil 4 or Diablo, which did that perfectly. So sad. The atmosphere feels kind of different too, thanks to the lighter colors of the original compared to the more washed out port. Again, it's a matter of preferences. Do I really have to? I thought I did the obligatory review segment already. Darkstone obviously gets a high recommendation.
Yeah, boy.
Was it perfect? No, but the 30 or so hours I've spent with it were great. It's such a fun little gem of a game. It will fit right into any PlayStation fanatics collection, especially if they can't really afford getting Diablo. But as I've said before, the game does enough on its own to warrant it not being called a straight-up copycat. If you're a fan of this genre, it's a must. Just don't try to get to the legend difficulty. There are so many better things to do with your life. Seriously. You can even cheat if you want to check it out that much. This time I won't judge. So thanks, Burzum Tetris, for recommending me this game. It was a ride I won't forget, and that I'll be revisiting from time to time. But for now...